You hear that song, and you know what time it is. It is time to nerd out with your geek out. Oh yeah, theology nerds. This is Trip, and today we have two of my friends joining me for a little experiment called the Homebrewed Happy Hour. That's right. We had a happy hour or two together with Dan Koch from the You Have Permission Pod, my friend, co-worker, Dr. Sarah Lane Ritchie. Both of them on the podcast answering questions sent in by the Homebrewed Christianity community, those elect people who donate each month to make the podcast possible. So, what do? We got on Zoom, like everyone else is doing these days, and we had beverages and happied for a couple of hours. But don't worry. You aren't missing out completely in this experiment. No, it's going to be happening again, and hopefully more often during this quarantined situation that we're in. And if you want to be a part of it, then just make sure you follow Homebrewed Christianity on social media. You can go to the Facebook page where we'll end up streaming them and stuff. But if you want the personal invite to the Zoom rooms, you want to get the entirety of the conversations, then you want to be a Homebrewed Community member. Then you get to submit questions and join the actual happy hour in our Zoom room. You can make commentary and make jokes at us and make us laugh at each other during it. And you can really, for the majority of us who aren't like superheroes working in the health industry right now, delivering food and all the necessary things, like if you're not in that, you're trying to help out by staying occupied. So there's no need to socially distance when you have to physically distance. Yeah, I've heard that on the news. It's catchy, and this is a way to make sure you do that. So over the next couple weeks, months, who knows how long, I'll hopefully have another couple sessions with these friends and other friends of the pod, you could say, where when you listen in, you're listening to friends drink and talk and have some good old times. Now, I need to warn everyone, this is an adult conversation where we say adult things about adult topics, so you do not want to listen to this one with your kids. You don't. And in fact, if you are one of the listeners who is from just maybe socially or culturally significantly more conservative than me, maybe you didn't spend a large amount of time in Los Angeles, or are you still coming out of a very regressive, and thank you for walking in body words and making jokes that some people's family members don't like, then you don't have to listen to this one. Yeah. First time Sarah's on a podcast, we discussed sex bots.
Oh my God, we did.
The ethics of them. And I've said to a friend, like the main dodge to do so you don't get in trouble, because there's like no correct answer to that. That's not something that's probably not good for a minister to answer their congregant, is to say, like, look, I really think we have to legislate sanitation. And if you say that, right, like it's just an essential thing, regardless of whatever.
Our precious bodily fluids, to quote Dr. Strangelove.
Good God, Joshua's on here now. He's a real ethicist. He probably has opinions about it, but he's been pre-gaming since 5. No. All right, Dan. What was the first?
Speaking of pre-gaming,
so I sent y'all questions people had sent in. Y'all can pick whichever ones you want to talk about.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, that this is one of the only, if not the only time in my life that I have started drinking 3 hours after waking up.
What do you do on vacation?
I usually wait till 4 p.m. or so on vacation, 3 or 4 p.m. It's 2 p.m. here, and I have a newborn infant still, so I woke up at 11 today because of our weird sleep schedule, and now I'm on to my first IPA, and it's weird, but I'm going to roll with it. Whereas for you guys, it's 10 p.m. It's
Indeed.
Normal.
Yeah, and
all right.
I'm drinking Sarah's gin and tonic because
he's drinking for 2. Yes.
Yeah, she's not drinking for 2.
Very sad.
Right. I realized, I could have totally messed this up and not drank, and then it would have just been Trip getting drunk and Sarah and I basically running roughshod over you conversationally by keeping our cool.
That would have been brilliant.
why don't we start with a simple question?
Okay.
A little softball. Favorite trilogy? Trip, I know you've got some thoughts here. Do you want to go last since you're gonna want to sweep it up?
Maybe. Yeah, I'll go last.
I'm gonna start. I'll start. My favorite trilogy is the Godfather trilogy, and I think that this gets really kind of under talked about because Godfather 3 is not as popular. It's not nearly as good, but I have watched it recently, and it is not bad. It is an enjoyable film. Sofia Coppola playing the main daughter of Michael Corleone is a travesty. She's very bad in it. It's unbelievable that he gave her that part. But other than that, the movie is quite good, quite entertaining. It's a little 80s looking. It was definitely a money grab for Coppola, but I'll watch it. I'll watch it many more times before I die. And 1 and 2 are nearly perfect films. So for me, it's Godfather.
What do you think, Sarah? Do you?
I don't know. I don't have. See, all of my. My honest answers are going to be the boring ones, like Lord of the Rings or something like that. I think if we're talking books,
how is Lord of the Rings a boring answer?
Because it's so common. I mean, it's too average. It's just too many. I mean, yes, Lord of the Rings, and then everything else after that, right? But if we're going to do like books, I remember, okay, how about I'll do my favorite sort of trilogy. Actually, I think there are 4 in this one, that I was like surprised by. And that was, C.S. Lewis's, space trilogy. Mm-hmm. I loved that one when I first came across it. Loved it. And it had actually like surprising levels of theological nuance in it. Based on like my experience prior to that, with C.S. Lewis. So I was just really impressed with it. Loved it.
Dan did movies, so you could have done a trilogy in movies.
That would be Lord of the Rings.
I would pick Lord of the Rings for books. But if it's movies, there's really only one answer. It's Star Wars. The original, 4, 5, and 6, greatest trilogy. It was so good in a trilogy, its mediocre prequel and later trilogies are still not bad. That's like high-quality trilogy material. It's respectable. The other idea I had was Stryper in 1984 to 1986, where you get Soldiers Under Command, To Hell with the Devil, and In God We Trust. That is pure bumblebee, Bible thumping, 80s spandex magic. Like that.
Wow. Yeah.
You got to admit.
That's true.
Yeah.
I've never listened to any of those albums straight through.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, you didn't even watch your friends' movies. So I don't even why would you listen to the first band to have 4 songs in the top 10 on MTV of all time, who are also like baptized into the blood of Jesus, Dan? I don't know.
Yeah. My taste is questionable.
I know. It's questionable. You're going Godfather, film people like that. But if you're thinking like the weak link of each, I remember really liking the first book of the space trilogy and C.S. Lewis. But I don't remember the whole plot line very well because I read them all in middle school.
Yeah, Out of the Silent Planet. Super good. Yeah. I remember liking all 3 of them. I don't know.
No, I remember liking it, but I was trying to remember. But
if it can't stick with you that well, then how's it going to top Star Wars is what you're saying.
Yeah, Return of the Jedi is the weakest link, but it still has Ewoks.
True.
But then you get to actually go to Cuba in Godfather Part 3, and that was pretty fun. But
I think we should transition to some theology before the drinks kick in for you and I, Trip. I thought the first question you sent us is pretty great. It just says Atonement Theory Power Rankings. Sarah, what? You don't like that?
Can I do none of the above?
None of the above?
None of the above.
Well, okay, let's hear your rationale. I have 2 different ways of ranking them. Let me just throw those out there. I won't dump my rankings.
We should just affirm the fact that someone sent us in a question framed like it was a sports talk radio.
It's a Bill Simmons, move. It's great.
Yeah. Power ranking atonement theories.
I think it's funny. So I have 2 ways of doing this. The first is the atonement theory lens rankings. Okay. So that's either the atonement theories accomplish something ontologically, metaphysically, or atonement theory shows something true about God, but doesn't like change the fabric of the universe in any way, other than insofar as we relate back to God as individuals. And then the other ranking is just the actual theories. Why don't I say the ones I've got, and then if you need to add any, we can make sure we have the full list, and then we'll start with Sarah and her completely poo-pooing the whole idea. So I've got penal substitutionary atonement, satisfaction theory, ransom. Is ransom the same as satisfaction, or are those different?
No, if you want me to delineate the difference.
No, I don't. Just tell me. Okay. Christus Victor, scapegoat, participation in Christ, classic early theory, and moral exemplar. Is that the list, or is there another one?
What about like mimetic?
Mimetic?
Scapegoat, like
that's scapegoat, right?
Okay, you're going to... Well, I mean, there's like...
Girardian is its own, is one. We're not going to give him two. Okay, so Sarah, you want to motivate while they are all tied for last?
Yeah, no, I think there's bad and less bad here. I mean, so the problem with the one, like with the moral exemplar.
Happy Good Friday indeed.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm happy to sort of like spin out my own personal like heresy here, which is definitely what's about to come out of my mouth.
Please.
But so the problem with ones like obviously like with like moral exemplar is that they don't seem to do much ontologically, right? It's like, oh great, Jesus is an awesome person, and like great, awesome. So it doesn't seem to achieve much ontologically. So that's kind of like, well, if we're looking for a moral exemplar, there are other options that I actually quite prefer, and so that's not particularly powerful or appealing. But anything like penal substitutionary atonement, ransom theory, like any of those, where you're trying to in some way like kill one person to achieve the big guy, right? Or to appease the big guy. Sorry. And I understand that there are like levels of nuance to all of those and their depth and blah, 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 blah. I got it. But those just depict a God that is, I think, is not the God that I couldn't sign up to that kind of God. So I do find myself being torn between, wanting to say, well, okay, Christ was participating in, the fullest kind of expression of reality and divine love and presence that we have ever seen. And I guess could be sort of like a moral exemplar thing where it's like you're seeing in Christ sort of like the fullest expression of God, and you are being invited to also participate in that. But there's also a way that I think that you could say that Christ, that the death and resurrection of Christ does something to like the fabric of the universe because of his participation in the fullest expression of divine love. But I'll stop there. I don't have much preference between like the options that are usually laid out. I'm going to stop now before I get into too much trouble.
Trouble from who exactly?
All Christians.
Well, from Dan specifically. He's very vicious.
All the real theologians and all Christians.
By the way, I did just on the Zoom link post on the Facebook event there, you could ask questions there. I put post questions here. So if you can't add them in the chat because of the bots, but you can go on Facebook or you could text one of us or something.
They were real distracted by Dan's hygiene questions.
Anyway, that's great, Sarah. Why don't I go and we'll let Tripp close this one out since he's, just the theological podcast heavyweight amongst us. So obviously in my lens rankings, and I'm sure, Sarah, you'll agree, I like reveals something true about God more than accomplishes something. Or do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So that's interesting that you say ontologically that moral exemplar doesn't do much. I agree with that. And since I don't mind it, that's what I currently have as number one. Mm-hmm. Although my number two, participation in Christ, those are tight. Those are close to each other. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting you mentioned that we might have better moral examples than Christ if we have to pick one. But mm-hmm. I'm not convinced that moral exemplar requires that we have the number one moral exemplar in front of us.
Yeah.
Like maybe there are 20 other people that lived more morally than Jesus of Nazareth or something. That doesn't ruin it for me, because faith is always contextual. We don't. None of us has access to that power ranking of the most moral human beings that ever lived. So Christ's example, mediated through the early Christians and those writings and the early liturgies, is like plenty sufficient for anything we're ever going to try and figure out in our 10. So I like moral exemplar. I think it kind of gets a bad rap because people really want that ontology. They really want it to have ripped the fabric of the universe. And of course, that's in some of the gospel accounts, like, the clouds darken and the whatever thing rips in two, the veil. But I am less inclined to need that. And so I think of people's relationship with Christ as pretty personal and phenomenological, as I know you do as well. And I just think, what am I actually doing here? My interaction with God is pretty direct in terms of, insofar as I have it, it occurs somewhere in my conscious experience. But my interaction with Christ is not, unless I infer that Christ is part of the Trinity. But that's still a move I have to make. And so when I'm really thinking about Christ, I'm thinking about Christ's life. I'm trying to live like Christ. Even the basic sacraments, and it kind of blends with participation theory here a little bit. When I take the holy water and remind myself of my baptism, when I take the bread and wine of his body at the Eucharist, like, these are like, I'm just kind of participating. But I'm remembering, I'm thinking about the ethics, the morality, the sacrifice, the whatever. So I guess I'm a little bit combining one and two. Then I've got scapegoat, which I like, but it's like a little modern. I don't know. I feel like what Robert Bella said about Gerard is like, he's like, psychologically, I think it's great, but like historically, I don't think it's accurate. It's probably not true that like scapegoating is how we got culture and, like all that stuff. Like, we were kind of language and cooperative and religious before we were scapegoating, according to Bella. And then Christ is Victor. Can we talk about Christ is Victor? Basically, I'll after this, I'll just say penal substitution, satisfaction, ransom are all tied for last. But let's talk about Christ is Victor. So I want to love Christ is Victor, Christus Victor. I don't know however you want to say it. I just don't have as much confidence in the claim that Christ has defeated death. Like, I really want that claim to be true, but there are versions of Christianity that I would still live wherein Christ has not defeated death in any sort of final kind of a way that I'm going to participate in, any more than kind of the way I can, quote, participate in that by living a life that is rebuking sin and death or something like that. So that's why I have it down at 4. I'm wondering what you guys think of that.
So, the rules, when I think of like how you're going to power rank atonement theories, is it shouldn't, anyone that God requires something versus revealing something, I'm going to lead towards revealing, or makes a demand versus demonstrating something.
Good.
The other side is that the question of violence, God has to not be the decision maker for violence, but the victim. So God's identity is with the victim in the cross. The other is that the cross is a place we remember how shitty we are. And so one of the elements in the book that I'm editing, the last edits currently, if my children leave me alone, that's about to come out, I was doing the cross chapter today, is I use the image of a transferable nightmare and use the Scrooge story, right? And so Scrooge has this experience of seeing the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. And then he falls into his own grave at the end and wakes up, right? And he's been haunted. But what he's been haunted by is the reality of who he is, right? Like, and I think the cross gives us the right nightmares. And so it's not like you want to avoid the ugly, the blood, the guts, the scary, the judgment or whatever. It's just, it's for the purpose of transformation, to getting out of your grave, going to new life, and like not screwing over Tiny Tim. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the cross gives us the right nightmares. And I think for the Western church, that generally means that we've turned the cross into something that's compatible with neoliberal capitalism and an exploitive imperial dominance. It also is something that fits in churches that preserve white supremacy. Like, there's so many ways in which we've tamed what should be the thing that freaks us the freak out, right? Like, if you are an American Christian and read Cross and the Lynching Tree and don't squirm, then you either think you're reading someone in a different religion, or you didn't hear it correctly, right? So I feel like atonement theories are really important, and it's the hyper individualization that happened in it, and this desire that atonement is making you right for heaven. But like, even the hymn says, "Fit us for heaven," not because like you don't belong there, but because you don't fit right now. Right, like, or the Lord's Prayer is like, may like your kingdom come on earth as in heaven. The problem is who we are and how we relate in the present material order, and so that reminder of our screwed upness, if we're avoiding cursing on a live stream, is important. And so for me, like, if I'm power ranking, number one is Christus Victor. Because atonement's primarily not about you. It's about God's divine initiative, the one who loves in freedom and chose to invest God's self in the world, in us, and despite our ugliness. Second one is going to be moral influence, but not moral influence as liberals normally appropriate. I'm talking about Abelard and Schleiermacher version. Abelard gives this picture of moral influence where the holy, infinite love of God shoots like an arrow into this flesh that wants to resist it. And it starts to open up and they're going to die. And yet they realize what just was thrown in them was more of who they want to be than they want. And it closes up and holds the infinite love of God. That's very different than being like, I think Jesus said cool stuff in the Sermon on the Mount, and I think we should do that, right? Like, and because atonement is primarily a statement that which you do not contain within yourself, but that which you came from and that which you're going, connects to you, invests in you, and loves you and affirms you despite who you are and where you're thrown, right? Like, and where you are in the world. And so it's actually the gift of grace that comes through atonement that enables us to be honest about who we are and our own participation in systems of injustice and violence and exploitation. And when liberal Christians or progressive Christians get rid of atonement, I get depressed. I also know I've been working on this class that's coming up in Homebrew, like on James Cone's work. His resistance to white Protestants getting rid of blood language is really important. I don't know what to make of it yet. I just know that every time I read it, it's problematic to me, because I grew up loving the song Old Rugged Cross, and then I was like, I'm not sure about that, for other reasons. But what hymns you like as a kid probably are the ones all the people around you sing loudly. But anyway, so the scapegoat one I find problematic because of my problems with Gerard, but that's fine. But like, power ranking wise, like, the one I really don't like is penal substitutionary atonement. If you put Anselm in his own context, it's great. Like, I don't have like a huge problem with it. It's just no one does. Jörg Rieger puts Anselm in his own context and is critiquing imperial power. So if someone cares, like, you can go read about it. But like, I just think when you like ask the question atonement power rankings, then you have to ask yourself, what is your particular historical context and what are the idols that exist there? Because atonement theories are primarily revealing the idolatry of a given context and then saying God judges them in the context of resurrection. And if you think of the level of anxiety, the binaries that are perpetuating animosity, the ability to judge in the context of resurrection would be a real gift of grace for our culture and situation. But I think part of the reason we get into binaries, we get into tribes, and then our definition of ourselves is the judgment of the other rather than even recognition or understanding of our own convictions, is because we don't actually think that at the ultimate source of existence intends to know us completely, love us completely, and insist upon that love despite our brokenness and our complicity in systemic problems. So atonement theories are real important to me. I have a love-hate relationship with all of them, but my power ranking would be I judge all theologians that don't have one, and I really judge humans that don't think they need one.
Yeah. That's interesting. I have not, I don't have a theology degree, first of all, but I have not spent time thinking about or reading about atonement through the lens of contextual theologies yet. So that's a very interesting lens. Haven't thought about it once. So I've only thought sort of from a quote unquote abstract, removed, give me the short chapter on the 7 theories and let's compare them type of a thing. So that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought of most of what you just said because I just haven't gone there. Sarah, I want to hear more from you responding to Trip.
So I think I need to bring in another one of the other questions that came in, which was how important is Jesus to your affirmation of God? So I have never quite understood the sort of universal compulsion to affirm Jesus as the obviously most amazing human being that's ever lived. I grew up in an entirely, a very biblically grounded tradition. Well, they would call themselves biblically grounded tradition. So spent most of my life, reading the Gospels every day. So got a really good understanding of all the narratives and all their complexity. Did graduate degrees in which there's biblical studies was a big part of it. And I can understand the theological scholarship around the ideas around why the person of Jesus is so important in salvation history and in Christian theology more just in general. But I have always struggled to find Christ as personally compelling as most people, even non-Christians, interestingly, even non-Christians, I've always struggled to find Jesus as personally compelling or as theologically sort of the draw for me into religious life, as apparently everybody else in the world does. And so I think you can separate sort of the general public. You talk to your average person on the street who's not a Christian, we'll say, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, Jesus is the most amazing person that ever lived, and I like the life of Jesus, and I want to be like Jesus." I don't need the rest of that Christian religion nonsense, right? So you have that kind of popular conception of Jesus as the most loving and incredible person that ever existed. But my experience of reading the narratives about Jesus and sort of the sort of the textual evidence that we actually have about the person of Jesus, there are qualities about the person of Jesus as presented, the actual narratives about his actual life, words, actions, things that I struggle to find so personally compelling or inviting. And I often wonder if the specific lenses of the authors of the Gospels give us versions of Jesus that are not going to be equally appealing to all individuals or populations or people groups. I often think that I think the Jesus that we get is a particularly male Jesus, for example, and a particularly a Jesus that makes sense within certain power structures, and there's just a lot about Jesus as presented through the gospel writers that I don't find personally compelling. When I was a child, most of my life, actually, I have found myself much more drawn towards praying to God the Father than I have to Jesus. Jesus has always been a difficult one for me to connect to. And I realize we're talking about God, so it's not like I'm just talking to any guy in the street here, but the vision, the expansive vision of divinity that I have kind of spent my life on and in really has not been one that is tied to the person of Jesus. And so I think this is why I have a hard time with ranking atonement theories because for me, I'm just I struggle to existentially grasp the centrality of atonement within sort of the way that I approach religion, or even just actually, to be honest, the the ability of God to transform, right? So everything that Tripp said, I think you could get without Christ, which is really a terrible. I know this is all complete heresy, but like I struggle to see why atonement is necessary for God transforming the world, drawing people more fully into who they can be. And also, I think the sort of the models of God that I find the most compelling on intellectual, spiritual, corporate levels are not always the models of God that are the ones requiring a particular version of Christology that I think most Christians would be signing up to. So
that's really interesting. I resonate with a lot of that. By the way, we really dropped the ball. Someone should have said my favorite trilogy is Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
I thought y'all were going to judge me if I said that.
No, that would have been great.
I was going to say that and then say, my bad, Creator, Christ, and Spirit one. And
good.
like, and do the self-progressive Christian edit, and then I cut that whole joke.
That's fine. So Sarah, I both resonate with it, and then I don't, and then I find myself diverging at points. So it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot in there. You're right. There's interesting stuff about the different gospel writers and the different version of Christ we get. You could even add in like, what do we get from the really early liturgical Christ hymn stuff in like Paul's letters is sort of its own Jesus. And there's also maybe a sixth one, the Jesus of Revelation. But so as a kind of amalgamation of like all my Gospels readings, I've probably done quite a bit less of the like critical source stuff than you have. All of that kind of mixed together, plus the lives of people I really want to be like and the way that they express Christ's role in their lives, plus throw in like the imitation of Christ and some other contemplative stuff. It's a big mix for me. It's a mixed bag. I'm really not like a New Testament guy in terms of what I have spent my theological time thinking or reading about. I tend to go to like universalism. I like the Old Testament. I like inerrancy questions, etc. So as a kind of a novice, there is enough in all that Jesus content, probably not half of it, but the other half, there's enough there that I'm super compelled by it. Like, again, I don't feel this pressure to be like, and Jesus is number one, undeniably, historically number one. Everyone else is a faker or whatever. I don't have that impulse. So when I think of Jesus in terms of this question of how important is Jesus to my affirmation of God, I sort of want to split it up. There's two ways of thinking of affirmation. There's like, I believe, like credo, I affirm. And in that, it's like 50, 60% maybe of my affirmation of God. Mostly my affirmation of God is like personal experience, prayer, which you and I have talked about both on podcasts and offline. And I don't have any way of knowing that that's Jesus of Nazareth or the Christ or whatever. I just know that there's a thing, an entity, a something, and it looks like what other people experience when they pray and in these traditions, including Christianity. And so I'll call that Jesus because I'm a Christian. But if I want to define my affirmation of God as like including my practices, including, again, like liturgical practices and sort of daily habits that I try and inculcate in myself. If I want to include things like when I am thinking about how to respond to somebody, when I'm thinking about how Jaffrey and I should prioritize our finances, when I'm thinking about all these ethical and like interconnected with other people questions, then Jesus rises to like 80, 90% of it. So that shows, I think, that I do find something more compelling there, perhaps than you do. And I'm really interested in that. And that seems like a difference.
See, that's really interesting because one of the puzzling things for me that I've often noticed is that the most compelling Christians that I've ever met, and the ones who have sort of like drawn me the deepest into the faith, have often not been the ones who I would describe as being speaking and acting as the Jesus depicted in the Gospels was speaking and acting. Oftentimes, I feel like the people that I would usually describe as being the most Christ-like are actually far more intuitive, loving, like connecting, meeting people where they're at than Jesus was, right? And so, so when I read the Gospels, my sense is that Jesus was not only Jesus had like multiple levels of engagement always going on, right? And so at many points, his encounters in the Gospels seem to sacrifice the individual in front of him for the overall goal, right? So he had a point to make, or he had like a larger societal critique to make, and so somebody got hit with a barb because like a really strong critique. Because of the larger point that was like at the heart of the gospel message at that moment. Go ahead. Someone gets hit with a barb, but usually so that someone else can get hit with love, like the Samaritan woman at the well or whatever. And I have to mention this. It's a complicated thing. It's now a very problematic thing that will be getting its own You Have Permission episode, and I would imagine Homebrewed. Jean Vanier, founder of L'Arche Communities, who it is now clear engaged in some sexual abuse, not of the, thankfully, gratefully, not of the, disabled people at L'Arche, but some people in which he was involved in spiritual direction. So that's its thing. That's something that I literally found that out the day my son was born. And so I kind of had to put it aside. Well, I put it aside because there was more important stuff going on. But I have a lot to process around that. He's a major hero of mine. But he wrote a commentary on the Gospel of John that is just like soaking with tenderness. And he sees what you're talking about in Jesus in the Gospel of John, like, and he makes a compelling argument, the way that he reads that gospel. So I hear you, but for me, there's a bit of a workaround there that I now have to, for all, like, the short end of the Vanier controversy is like, I think he had some fucked up ideas about sex that he got from his mentor, who was a man of a different era. And I really wish he had changed his mind on that. But I think he still got tenderness toward the disabled, toward just like people in all of our vulnerabilities and infirmities. I think he got that right. And he really sees that in the Gospel of John. So that's an interesting counterpoint to what you're saying. See, that's really interesting because I do wonder how much we read into the text what we want to be true of Jesus, right? Sure. So someone like Jean Vanier, and also, I mean, we could actually have a very interesting discussion about Jean Vanier because I think that getting lost in the story about Vanier at the moment is sort of like the fucked up approach to sexuality that Christianity has always had. And I wish we had better language to talk about sexuality and I feel like there's a larger conversation about sexuality that needs to happen, and that would head off a lot of these problems if we were just more chill with sexuality more broadly and like discussing things more openly.
And you should. No, I'm saying y'all should ask the weird question about the guy that's newly single.
Oh yes,
but we'll get there. Okay.
Let's close this one off though.
That's true, but the Vanier thing specifically feels less like the kind of sexual repression larger story, and more like weird ass Esalen Institute, like New Thought hippie sex stuff. It's like Mary and spiritual practice and sexual interaction.
But sexuality and spirituality are always linked far more closely than anyone is going to be comfortable with. Seriously, they are.
No, they are. But I'm saying if you wanted to like put a heading on what has Christianity gotten wrong about sex over the last 2,000 years, you would probably not say they got way too free with their bodies and weird mystical prayer sex shit.
Well, exactly. But that's why I'm saying I think what happens is because we don't have a healthy conversation about the link between sexuality and spirituality, that people go off the rails, because those who do sense that connection go off the rails with it sometimes and just don't have a better framework for it. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's very interesting. We should definitely have that conversation.
Come back to that one.
Okay.
But just to like full circle, and then we can probably move on to the next question. The thing I do think that we tend to see the Jesuses of the Bible, as we almost can't help but project onto what we're reading, our own experience, what we want to be true of God and Jesus. We see in Jesus what we want to see. I think oftentimes, and that's true of all texts. We bring something to the text, of course, and I would critique myself in that way as well. Like, I am completely aware that the Jesus that I have encountered for most of my life has been filtered through a variety of lenses and packages, structures, which I have differing relationships to. And of course, my relationships to those packages and those lenses are going to be affecting the way that I experience and understand and evaluate the role of Christ in atonement, actually, in Christian theology. So yes, I am definitely yes, I think that your critique is a good one.
So, Trip, you want us to move on to this other question?
No, well, I just anticipated that there's been a lot of support for Sarah's heresy in the comments, and
where in the bot comments?
No, now the bots have all left, so all the comments. But if I answered them, they've disappeared. So,
where are you seeing this?
In the Q&A.
No, you're not supposed to go look at them. You're not supposed to reveal you're looking at them. Gregory Stevens is full support. He also says that Esalen sex is the best sex, and you should come join my California spiritual comrades. Jake Doctor supports heresy. I feel like people are just wanting us to say heretical things, and all my responses were going to be way not heretical. So that's why I was like, we should just skip the question. I'm also like too Hegelian for that question. Like, to me, like the question, like, oh, you could have got that without Jesus, is a historical one, and all the historical things that I know, like the idea of the ultimate having materiality to demonstrate divine solidarity in the West doesn't happen prior to the idea of the incarnation. And then as a John Cobb-inspired creative transformation understanding of the incarnation, the idea that creative transformation, namely that the divine's connected to all embodied existence and participates in it fully, is not like Jesus doesn't have to have done that for the Christ to have participated in it. Like the Christ is more of a modal key than like if Christ is a center for one's reflection, then all embodied existence and their experiences are included within the divine life. And God has a type of solidarity in it that like means you don't need to then go and say like, oh, each of the gospel writers' rendition of their encounter with the Christ or narrative, like theological narratives, like nitpicking, because like the purpose then is to hear their voice as their own voice. Right. Like, and I feel like the tendency for evangelicals is to collapse the difference of these gospels into one synonymous like thing.
Right.
Like, well, there's where the truth is. It's this thing. And you're like, yeah, but which fucking day did he die? It's not even the same if you just look at the canonical gospels, which is a good thing to remind today. Right. And yet we canonize them all. And so my thought is, that all of those who participate in the body of Christ, their own encounter with the Christ, which for Christians is just their encounter with God is mediated by Jesus. Like I think that's like a minimalistic statement, is just to say that all of us have a gospel to tell about that encounter, and we canonize ones that contradict on the basic surface. So like what is wrong with us saying that the gospel gets more rich, more diverse, more multiplicity is included and folded into it when we give microphones to more and more people? And yes, there is like a centering act in the sense of the churches, like the reason Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were chosen is because like geographically, more people read them geographically, right? And which is it actually was popular in places that weren't civic centers, was the main feature of difference, right? Luke and John were popular where power resided. Matthew and Mark weren't. Anyway, but I think that we don't have this harmonizing gospel includes.
Can we give a microphone to Sarah? Like, is there a version of like, yeah, Jesus is pretty cool? And that counts.
I mean,
as
it's
one of the
basically
microphones.
Mark, right?
I mean, yeah, that's
Isn't
kind
that
of
like-
Mark.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
They say he's nice, but he's kind of mean. They say he's clear and elucidating things, but he doesn't elucidate anything in the text, right? Mark is this kind of the Jesus of Mark, as I understand it, is like a shadowy, powerful sort of figure. You're drawn to him, but you sure as hell don't understand him. And then the tomb's empty, and you're like, WTF?
Well, you're scared and don't tell anyone.
Right. Yeah. You're scared. Exactly, though, right? It's not the same as you run to tell the disciples, for instance. There, just so you guys know, there are also some questions on the Facebook comment section. I'm gonna, before I run to the bathroom while you guys chat about something, I'm just
You
gonna
have to
follow
pick
up
a
on-
question for her and I to talk about.
I will
that you
do
don't
that.
even hear
Okay,
what we say.
First, I'm gonna. Okay, good. I'll pick one that I don't care what you say. I'm gonna respond to Annie's follow up. She said, "Dan, would you mind expanding on your comment regarding your difficulty buying into quote Jesus beating death?" Yeah, all I mean by that is like, I think I'm pretty thoroughly at a theology of a non-coercive God. I think there's, as Sarah and I recently talked about on You Have Permission on the Problem of Evil episode last week or whatever it was, there are a lot of questions about what counts as coercion, what counts as whatever. That's fine. But I'm definitely in the general camp of like, God's not routinely intervening, quote unquote, suspending the laws of physics, sort of like acting in a way to bring about all these good things in the short term, right? So death is not defeated. Death is still having its way biologically anyway, in exactly the same way it has for the, 1 billion years, 500 million years that there's, 5 billion years? How much is life? Earth is 4.5 billion years. Life is 500 million years, I think. So for the 500 million years that there's been biological life on the Earth, death still operates exactly the same way. You could maybe say that like quote unquote death, spiritual death does not operate the same way. That's probably true. I'm not sure how to quantify that. So what I mean is if Christ is victor is true, then it's sort of only true in a sense when Christ is raised from the dead. That's like a down payment on when it's actually true, which has to come later. And that hasn't happened yet. I would really love for that to happen. And I think there's some evidence that will happen. I think that people's experience with God is a kind of evidence that like, that the moral arc of the universe does bend towards justice or whatever, for instance. But it hasn't happened yet, and I don't always have as much faith in it every day as I'd like to. That's what I mean when I say I have a difficulty buying into that. And I don't know, Trip, maybe you don't even think of, it sounds like maybe you don't even think of Christ as victor in quite the same way that I apparently do.
Well, is that the question you want Sarah and I to discuss?
No.
Let's move on from this.
Okay, Sarah's like
I'm
done
over
with
atonement. I'm over
she's
atonement.
she's atoned all over the place, you know.
But this isn't really about.
She's maxed out on Christianese for one day. Like I can already
really
tell her. Look,
yeah.
Can you ask us a cognitive science question because that would make her feel better.
Or literally any other question that would be fun. Like these dating questions are fun.
I want to be around for cognitive science.
No. Ask one of these fun ones.
Okay, all right. I'm going to start this one, and then I'm going to regret not being here for all of it. This question is: I'm a newly single 30-year-old who kissed dating goodbye, and I'm asking how far is too far? How far is too far? Mic drop. You guys handle this one.
All right, Trip. I know that your years of being a youth pastor have prepared you well for this one. So why don't you go first?
What? I actually put this on there when I was sent it because I didn't want to answer it.
Oh God.
And I'm pretty sure it's a joke because not like, I mean, I know the individual who I'm not going to use their name.
I see.
But like they have the poster for the Road to Edmond had finally the definitive answer of how far is too far. And it was a joke about purity culture where the youth minister is in the van my character's harassing him, and he throws up his hand like this and says, "What if I don't touch the areola?" Is that like as if that's second base? And when I've screened the movie in groups, every time, I've probably done it 15, 16 times, someone asks about that, and I say, I was asked that as a youth minister. Like, is that allowed? And so, like, I get the idea. And now Alicia and I've been dating since 18, and I'm old now. So I have like almost no idea. Like, I really don't know what the answer is. I would just say that I'm very confident that I would delay things just for the sheer purpose of you came out of a relationship physically, that like I would make sure that if things like got tangled up with emotional trajectory, that you are cool having that person wipe your butt or the other one wipe their butt. Like, I'd figure that part out first. Like, that's the main thing. And like, for whatever it is you thought and the other thing is,
wiping each other's butts is where you go with. I mean, I get it. It's growing old.
If you got divorced and you were a conservative Christian and now you're like, we got married young, right? And now you're 30 and single. You aren't going to know
more about the question asker than we know here? Are you?
Yeah, I know who the person is. I wasn't going to use their name on a live stream.
Sure. I'm just saying, I feel like you've got all this background.
No, all I'm saying is,
and I'm running blind here.
All I'm saying is that, once your heart goes, there's not like a good like brake pedal, you know. And so I would just try to be strategic in advance. That's
right.
But the other thing I would say is that my experience with evangelical hermeneutics involved meant that large amounts of the wonderful gifts that God has given you were cut off because of shitty reasons.
Yep.
Right. And so I feel like this is a time you got to holler Aristotle, you know, or maybe a good Anglican friend, where they're just like, I'm going to via Medea this stuff. Like, I'm going to go like in the moderate answer. And that's for the purpose that, like, once you get to the place that like the intimacy is reciprocal, you can go crazy as shit. That's like, that's my general advice. But I would also like only take really good advice from someone that's known you in the relationship you exited and out of it, and probably talk to a therapist. But
can someone give me the TLDR on Sarah's answer, or was that?
I haven't gone yet.
Time?
No,
she wouldn't even let me answer.
Oh, surprising!
Like, I have to answer first.
Okay, let's.
I will go
Sarah.
now. All right. Yeah.
I wanted her to answer first. I was outsourcing this to my professional therapist, and Sarah, who has theories about everything.
I am not a professional therapist, dude.
You're training to be a professional
2
therapist.
semesters of a 5-year program. Let's just be very clear. Not a doctor, not a psychologist yet.
It's okay. All I have to read is 2 books about it to tell everyone I'm a doctor. You know?
All right, Sarah, what's your answer? Are you going to answer like the actual person the Trip has knowledge of, or you're going to go to like a...
No, I'm going to go to the actual question. I'm going to take the question at face value.
Great. Good. Yes. Thank you.
So the question at face value is, I'm a newly single 30-year-old who kissed dating goodbye. I think most of the listeners will know what we're talking about here. And asks, how far is too far? Okay. So for my answer to that person, a 30-year-old who for most of his life or her life has kissed dating goodbye and let's just say erred on that extreme end of the spectrum, my advice is going to be very different to a 17-year-old boy, for example. Okay.
Interesting.
And I actually I'm quite happy to speak like openly about purity culture in all forms. These are not taboo topics for me at all.
You're willing to speak truth to power. You are a fucking hero, Sarah.
Stop it. No, I didn't say speak truth to power. I'm willing to be open about like my own experience in purity culture, which is a different thing.
But 5 years ago, it would have been kind of heroic to even talk about it at all. Maybe 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, indeed. Probably more like 10 years ago, but
10 years. Anyway, I'm sorry. That's the beer talking. Go on.
So when you spend 15, 20 years in a mindset where you are trying to avoid being tainted by sexual sin, that is a real mind fuck. That like restructures the way you understand reality, the people that you're attracted to. It becomes a filter and a lens for how you evaluate your own closeness to God, like whether or not you're like it affects the way that you evaluate your performance in any given area on any one day. It becomes like a bizarre metric that you're constantly living in, and so I actually most people I think are probably not quite this honest about things, but I actually regret waiting until marriage to have sex. I wish that I had not done that because I would have been so much healthier and able to have close, intimate relationships, know myself, my boundaries, what worked for me, what didn't work for me. I would have had so much more self-knowledge if I had not been asking that question, how far is too far? And the other thing I would say here as well is that a lot of times in purity culture, the question of how far is too far and trying to avoid impurity at all times, it allows people to hide behind rules and avoid trauma and pain and issues with like your relationship with yourself. So it's an easy way out to just say, well, I'm just never going to have sex with anyone. I'm not going to kiss anyone until I'm at the altar. Like that allows you to not do the difficult work that you have to do if you're in complex relationships, dealing with physicality, dealing with sexuality, negotiating this most intimate core part of ourself and how it's expressed in sexuality in a healthy way. And so I mean, the result for me was just, I mean, I would not, so I'm pregnant with a little girl and I would not want her to make the sort of like purity culture based decisions that I did. I would much rather she was 23 and was in a serious relationship with somebody for a couple years and they made an informed decision to explore sexuality together. I would much rather she did that and approached it responsibly, of course, and was very self-aware and honest with herself and her partner. I'd much rather she did that than ticked some box and waited until her wedding night to have sex. Also, it's just I do think there are things that you don't know about each other about a partner until you are going to intimate places with each other. And I think sexual intimacy is a very important part of any marriage. And if you are not exploring what that looks like for you in the context of your partnership, I think that it can, it basically, it prevents you from flagging up issues that will occur down the road. And a more mature and welcoming and accepting kind of approach to intimacy within your relationship can sort of deal with problems as they come up much earlier. So I mean, I regret waiting until marriage to have sex. So for this person who is just coming out of a relationship or is newly single at 30 and is still living I kiss dating goodbye life, I would say, let's just not even ask that question of how far is too far. I think that let's do some unpacking. Let's do some unpacking and peeling back the layers of all the harm that is caused by living in that mentality for so long and trying to find a different way to engage your body and sexuality and intimacy and relationship.
I think there's an interesting psychological link between just keeping that box unchecked, as it were, and what fundamentalism does for people. It's like, it's hard in one sense. You are sacrificing a kind of a actions freedom, but you get all this certainty and warm feelings and whatever as a result. But then the problem is, it doesn't adequately take account of the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're kind of giving yourself all these psychological benefits, but then eventually you are almost definitely going to smack into a wall that you're totally unprepared for. And you think, well, I'll be prepared for anything. I have denied the pleasures of the flesh. I'm strong. You're maybe strong in that sense, but you're not psychologically strong because you haven't had to deal with the ambiguities of the world. Yep. So you're trading one strength for another. I'll answer the question.
Dan. Oh, no, this is...
Go ahead.
This is a question that always comes up with this in my head is like short of, I don't know, applying fairies to virginity, then like I feel like whether or not you consume factory farmed meat more ethically problematic than if you have consensual sexual intercourse. Right, like yeah. you know, like, and I just...
Dude, that's funny you say that. I was just thinking about a slightly different version of that the other day. I was like thinking about...
It's like it's not an ethical question for you to think about. It's just like if you're thinking about the hierarchy of that, or if you're a vegetarian, like purchasing vegetables and fruits that are only at that price because the farm bill in the United States is being used to undercut family farms in the global South. Like,
right.
It's just odd. And also, I just want to know, Alicia thinks I'm a sexual fundamentalist. So like everything in me is like, no. Right. But like, here's a question that I've posed to teenagers with, like, these are like 16 to 18-year-olds when they get really hung up on this. I say, which is a bigger act of violence, to support a porn industry that is riddled with everything the porn industry is riddled, or to have a consensual act with a peer?
Okay, but that's interesting because the thing I was thinking about was porn, because that was the issue for me and every single one of my friends for 10 plus years of our lives.
Yeah, I find porn way more ethically problematic than consensual sexual engagement.
Right.
Like, and so by a million times. Like,
but think
I was a minister to a number of former porn stars, and just to porn stars, like whatever they
porn actors.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't want to like say star. Like, sure, I met Ewan McGregor a couple times.
Yeah. You mean people who worked in the industry. Yeah.
Ewan has plenty of money. So like if I name drop him, that's because he's cool. If I say,
that was a real name drop? I thought you were just using an example.
I've interviewed him on the podcast a couple times, and I was a consultant for his Jesus movie. But regardless,
but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Okay, listen though. Let me
you know what I mean.
So I was thinking about this though with regard to pornography. So I don't know the ins and outs of advertising revenue on the web.
You can't say ins and outs. Come on.
Okay, sorry. Listen though, just let me say. Okay.
I just want you to know that I'm going to totally screen grab Sarah's face while I said that for her new post picture every time she's on the
use
podcast.
That every time you.
It's going to go
from the pod. So look, let's say that every time you have your pornography excursion, you generate 20 cents of revenue or something for advertisers. I don't know if that's the right number. That seems about right. Maybe even high. I would think. And you do that 1,000 times over, let's say, a 3 or 4 year period, because you do it twice a weekish or something like that. You have generated $20 to, I think, an unethical industry. I don't like the idea of supporting the pornography industry. How much money do we spend on fast fashion on average per year? As even people who are like, I'm not a big shopper. Obviously, I'm not making YouTube videos of my Forever 21 haul on Saturday or whatever, but I still probably spend $200 or $300 a year on clothing that is made as cheaply as possible in exploitative conditions in other countries. Mm-hmm. Okay. And how much mental anguish would I have about pornography usage versus fast fashion. Now there are other areas here, right? So maybe it's affecting my marriage or my relationship with my significant other. Maybe it's affecting other things. And of course, certain kinds of sexual deviance, CE, not TS, can go really deep into the psyche and cause major life problems. I'm not denying that. I would never deny that. But we don't really have a good sense of our contributions to injustice in the world. And I was just thinking about that the other day, and it reminded me, your thing reminded me of that. And I'll agree that it's an industry I don't want to support at all. But like, I don't spend any time thinking about my jeans or whatever, hardly any. And I'm doing at least like that $20 was over a 3 to 4 year period in that little example. It's back of the envelope math. So anyway, I think that's interesting.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you think it would be possible to have an ethical porn industry?
This is a great question. So this came up sort of at the end of the first You Have Permission episode about purity culture.
Uh-huh.
And my guest was sort of arguing on behalf of sex workers. It was more like strippers and surrogates and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a possible world, as philosophers like to say. You can certainly imagine it. It's not logically impossible. I think it's pretty damn naive. I mean, you might have corners of it that are ethical, but let's say you make 20% of the pornography industry like thoroughly ethical. It's like vetted. Everyone's getting testing every week. You've got an HR department with real ability to sort of navigate disputes. And even though you're filming and writing and doing this like very primal act where there's including all the fetish shit with the tons of power and like choking women and all that, let's say somehow you could make 20% of all of that thoroughly ethical. Mm-hmm. You've still got the other 80%, which is trying to do what they're doing for cheaper. So in a market economy, ethical pornography will cost a lot more money, and most people won't be willing to spend that money. So then you have a grifter version of that spreads out on the long tail.
Mm-hmm. And, all right, Dan,
you know what I mean?
I want to ask y'all both a question because you just revealed something, and I'm sure there's one of these questions related to this. Everything you're saying is why fucking Bernie Sanders should have been the Democratic nominee, because what you're saying is that capitalism doesn't even allow you to have ethical porn, ethical eggs, ethical vegetables, or ethical steaks, or ethical driving a car. You're saying that the market itself, if there is a market for it, it will be exploited because the logic of capitalism, right? You're saying that we can't even be trusted. Like for that same logic that closes off porn, you should close off alcohol, weed, and everything else.
Well,
I'm not going to suggest we all enjoy them. I'm personally enjoying one of them currently, and wish the Scotland have supported the other. But I got weed. Okay, so yes,
I thought you.
I know.
I've drank all of my alcohol.
I understand.
I've drank Sarah's, and I'm working on her child.
It's starting to show up. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but here's my main point is that why is it that when a conservative ethical response comes into something that has been included into the market, they then want to shortchange the logic of the market? I just think the market is unethical. And that it is that's the problem itself. Like everything you said about porn is the same thing you should say about the eggs I paid an extra £1.50 to have delivered to me.
And
it's only because I have a podcast. I have to have multiple incomes to afford eggs that didn't torture the chickens.
Right.
You know, but like it is like, that's the thing I'm saying. Like it's like one of those people that are like, yeah, I mean, they're not like happy eggs.
There's a difference between
they just haven't had their beaks chopped off, and it's called Joseph Biden.
Right. Okay.
That was a hard pivot.
We're gonna get there. You're gonna get
but
there.
he basically
hold on.
makes me feel like someone that hadn't had their beak chopped off. Like you're supposed to
hold
say
on.
thank you.
Okay, listen. There's a difference between regular markets and black markets. So it's true.
You can't call half the internet a black market.
No. Listen to me.
Pornhub.
So
Pornhub.
I know
Pornhub
that a lot of
has more like people getting raped on it videos by like actual underage people rape videos than it has ethical porn.
Listen, what I'm telling you is it's harder to legislate something like pornography than it is something like eggs. We have the Food and Drug Administration. You could, in theory, pass a law that all eggs had to be happy chickens. Now, enough poor Americans would not support
We
that
passed
law.
a law in California that you have to be wearing a rubber. You can have minimal sex work like support. The problem is that large numbers of poor people like porn, eggs, and sex.
No, I know. I'm just saying at the supply level, at the supply moment, it's much easier to control for food or clothing or something than it is a digital medium that anybody can upload from anywhere in the world with any person. They can fuzz out the face if it's something really gross or whatever. Like, I'm just saying there are practical differences between the two. Let's hold on. Let me at least answer the 30-year-old how far is too far question. I didn't get to answer it yet. And this is fun.
It's
shit.
third base.
The answer is third base. Okay, moving on. No, I am famous for my tough stance on purity culture. Okay, I am known as a guy who speaks truth to power, to the purity culture power structures. I'm kidding. I think it's interesting, Sarah. I don't regret waiting for marriage, and I can think of two reasons why. But I mean, I understand your story. I don't think you're wrong or anything. But I was in a band for 10 years, and the kind of sex that I would have had access to and did in theory have access to would mostly not be the kind of sex I would be glad that I had. Also, I have had panic disorder my whole life, and it really got triggered, I think, because of purity culture. So this is a bit of a complicated one. By any kind of romantic activity, I mean, just like my first kiss, anything, hand holding, I would feel awful the next morning. I would have panic attacks about it. And so I think if I had gone further, so to speak, and more regularly, I just would have heaped more panic on myself. And purity culture is somewhat to blame for that, but the panic disorder is logically prior because I exhibited my panic disorder in third grade before puberty. Right. So that's interesting. I think there's a kind of a different autobiographical thing there.
Exactly. And I think there's also, I mean, I don't want to be gendered about this, but purity culture, I do think tends to have inordinately harmful effects on women.
100%.
There's a sort of internalization of gendered messages about the self and about the worth of, and again, about sexuality, but sort of about how sexuality links up to other aspects of yourself and intimacy and the ability to connect with people in a deep and meaningful way. And so I think you are correct that people's autobiographies are going to some degree, determine their responses to purity culture and also to what is an appropriate sexual relationship for them. But I mean, my experience has been that purity culture is far more harmful than sexual activity itself. So there's
the hard thing is the other end of this is like children and abortions. Yeah. And so it's one of those situations where if that wasn't on the other end, I would probably be a lot more liberal about it. But the stakes are kind of massive.
But that's a pragmatic issue though. That's sort of like,
it is.
So I'm talking more
it's not
about
a moral issue. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, it becomes a moral issue.
Well, yeah, but there would be ways to address that. Like that's like your egg example, right? Like there would be ways to address another kind of egg. There are ways to. I mean, like we know how to prevent pregnancy. So there's
but there are trickle down. Don't get happy, Trip. Hold on. I don't mean it in a Reagan sense. There are trickle-down effects, Sarah's losing it, of messaging because people at lower information levels and at further distance from these helpful authorities or whatever will sort of make worse and worse decisions or whatever. It's very hard to map all that stuff out. I want to answer this question by answering it in a way that neither of you answered it, which is, what am I planning on telling my son when he's 15 or something that, or
that's good.
17? And I don't think my wife will listen to this, but basically my plan is to say, your hands and your mouth are your best friends, and hold off on whatever you can reasonably, but don't go crazy trying to hold off. But most of that is practical. I mean, frankly, it's practical. I don't want him impregnating somebody on accident. Like I'm pretty, my intuitions are pretty solidly pro-life. So if he did, great, we've got a grandkid or whatever it means, like we'll show up for that. And we'll end up loving that kid. But you can avoid that pretty easily, and you can be pretty happy avoiding it. There are some very happy endings that are not the same as that ending, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And when you're in your teens, early 20s, whatever, I think it's, I don't know, plenty satisfying. I'm not going to say much more than that.
Okay.
That's my answer.
I affirm your desire not to say more than that.
One slightly interesting thing here, there's a psychologically interesting thing about this question, how far is too far? I did an episode that's not out yet with a buddy who's a youth and young adult pastor at a pretty progressive church. And still, every single young person wants to know what the line is. What's the rule? How far is too far is exactly the question that like everybody asks. That's interesting by itself. Why do we want rules? Like the Sermon on the Mount, what Jesus is doing is taking you've heard it said, rule X. I say unto you, there's no such rule. It's about the intentions of your heart. You've heard it said, rule Y. I say unto you, there is no such rule Y. It's about the intentions of the heart. So there's something really, I think, psychologically accurate and insightful about that, the way that Jesus goes about that. And that's actually, Sarah, to circle way back, one of the things I love the most about Jesus that I can't live without is that big ethical move in the Sermon on the Mount and generally his ethical teaching away from the outward observance, which I do understand. The Pharisees get a bad rap. They weren't all legalists. Jesus might have been one, yada, yada, yada. But the philosophical move of, because the outward observant thing is, in a myth sense, is like incredibly true of the human experience. And Jesus punches huge holes in that. It's one of my favorite things about him. One of the things I can't live without in terms of my own way I value the world. Okay, I've been talking for a long ass time. Sorry.
Sarah should pick a question from the list.
I know which one she wants. You want her to pick.
I don't remember any of them currently.
And I think that Sarah and I are going to agree on it. Sarah, you should pick the one that we're going to agree on.
Okay.
It's time.
This is going to be rough. We're going to get Twitter hate mail. All right. Well, the question then is, I mean, it has to be the Biden one.
It's got to be
Biden.
What's the question? How is it phrased and stuff? Because
so in the list, it says Biden for real. Make Dan talk me out of voting green. I'm in Michigan.
There you have it. There you have it. That is the first hour of the Homebrewed Happy Hour. And there's a second hour of Homebrewed Happy Hour, except it is in the members podcast feed. It's a good place to put it. I figure that if you donate every month, you're like good enough internet friends with me to let you hear what comes out of my mouth after an hour of very committed happy houring. In fact, you'll discover that the rumor that has been mentioned on the podcast before, there's people have been saying, Trip, when you are a little bit tipsy per se, your politics get more progressive and your theology gets more conservative. That's how I was called a 5-beer Barthian when I was doing my graduate degrees. But yeah, I was. It was a nickname that was used. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you show up live next time if you are quarantining and want to connect socially on the interwebs. Also, if you're a Homebrewed Christianity community member, make sure you check the private feed to get the entirety of this conversation. And if you aren't, you should join up. Go to homebrewedcommunity.com. And on top of that, you'll also get all sorts of other things in the private podcast feed, included classes and lectures and other goodies. But until next time, remember to share the brew.